We start with the poem, Thomas Campion. Tune thy music to thy heart. Sing thy joy with thanks, and sow thy sorrow. Through devotion needs not art. Sometimes of the poor the rich may borrow. Strive not yet for curious ways. Concord pleases the more, the less 'tis strained. Zeal affects not outward prayers, only strives to show a love unfeigned. Tune thy music to thy heart when to her lute Clarina sings. Her voice revives the leaden strings, and doth in highest notes appear, as any challenged echo clears. But when she doth of morning speak, even with her sighs the strings do break. And as her lute doth live or die, led by her passion, so must I. For when of pleasure she doth sing, my thoughts in joyous sodain spring. But if she doth of sorrow speak, even with my heart the strings do break. This guy's really sensitive to music. We're talking about being hypersensitive to music. We're reading from the Untuning of the Sky, Ideas of Music and English Poetry. Here we talk about how you're played upon, of course, reflects an older tradition. We may recall that here Hamlet's little emblem of the benefit of Rosenkranz and Guildenstern, who likens the manipulation of the recorder to the crudely contrived attempts of the Danish sycophants to control him. Call me what instrument you will, the extended conceit concludes. Quote, though you can fret me, yet you cannot play upon me. Hamlet 3:2. In Shakespeare, though you can fret me, yet you cannot play upon me. Thus, figure of the self as instrument is traditional in Christian meditation. The petitioner asks God to tune up or play upon him, a mode of which can be discussed in the next chapter, but the situation that Hamlet alludes to, in which the active performer plays upon the passive auditor in a way which is likened to that in which the performer's instrument is controlled, is characteristic of the doctrine of effective music. Music becomes, in Campion's little poem, the vehicle or media for the transmission of feeling. The way in which this association is made is vastly different from what we might expect in a more typically Elizabethan appeal to the phenomenon of sympathetic vibration. For example, two lutes perfectly in tune will remain such that each will sound if the other is plucked, even as you and I. Do you think if we are perfectly in tune, we will sound together?
We are in tune, nog we are out of tune. That's why they feel good with each other, or they don't feel with each other.
Are we in tune sometimes? Do we have to tune up or be in tune?
You don't have to, that's automatic.
It is incidentally perhaps faintly ironic that the musical ethic
Every atom in their body, every
aesthetic is embodied in the text is far more advanced with respect to the continental music practice of thought of that as Campion's rather pedestrian setting. So we were leading into talking about mood and mode now from the Campion poem. The two extreme feelings used almost schematically in Campion's poem are that of pleasure and sorrow. So basically you can have moods, like the music can create moods. So we're going to discuss how that happens. The point is stressed that the appropriate feeling in Clarina, the singer expressed in the proper musical configurations, will elicit the identical feelings in the listening poet. Somehow the feelings are transmitted through the code. This is talking about
the vibrations.
It's a very elite form of encryption.
You see those
Very
patterns
elite.
here,
It's like encryption, like
The patterns. If you put another pattern, it will create a different pattern together. The same like the guy who has patterns of sound he makes. How you call that guy? Team of Curiosity. He has those sound patterns. Every new sound, every new vibration, and brings changes the pattern altogether into something different.
for a modern listener whose experience has been confined to classical and romantic music, it would be easy to imagine Clarina as singing in a major key to make her auditor's thoughts enjoy Sodden Spring, and in a minor key, one to break his heart, especially why a triad, embracing an interval differing only by the position of a semitone from another, should produce a feeling
on what side?
of
On
sadness.
the minor side.
Minor
keys
key,
are
dear.
are on the left side.
You know what a minor key
On the
is.
piano is on the left side.
A minor key is the sad mode.
I know, but it's on the left side.
Left side.
Is it?
Left side.
Oh, the right side.
It's a key, minor key.
What side it is?
What side? On the downside.
On the?
What do you mean the side of the key?
What side of the piano? It is left or right?
The minor?
Mm-hmm.
It's all over the piano. It's a
Really?
matter of the key spacings. Sadness in a year as opposed to the feeling of resolution occasioned by the other. Opens up, I can show you what major and minor is. We're having basic music theory class here. Opens up the whole notion of modality and ethos. That this subject become more and more important in the new musical aesthetic seems almost inevitable when one remembers the widely separating functions ascribed to music and text. Modality concerns the ability of certain musical configurations or groups and orders of configuration to elicit particular active and emotive responses in their hearers, and as we have seen, the speculative music of antiquity that was transmitted to the medieval writers on music contained much discussion of the various tonal systems and keys and their various effects. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about encryption through music and transmission of emotions by code, just as the 20th century listener mentioned above might have great difficulties in presenting a persistent questioner with a plausible account of why the minor passage was sad. Do you know why the minor passage is sad?
Because it sounds so.
It sounds sad, right? Why does it transmit sadness? And even why it made me feel sad to such an extent that he was willing to ascribe the sadness to the music itself. So the we're talking about musical theory here. Musical theorists of both the ancient and medieval worlds found it difficult to explain the nature of the correspondence between certain musical patterns and certain human feelings conventionally associated with them. Do you still think people have feelings in our modern age versus music?
Certainly.
They have good and joy versus sadness.
They do. They just don't get a chance to.
So this investigation still applies in the whole fully developed cosmological interpretation of music that combined Christian and classical doctrines of. So we're going across everything here, or of the Chinese, or Hindu, or Arabic musical systems in the East. The correspondences of pattern and feeling were provided for in terms of elaborate metaphysical identifications of elemental substances, bodily and emotional, humor, seasonal patterns, and mathematical, musical, and prosodic structures, etc. But aside from these connections, all established almost by fiat, there remained always an essential core of mystery. Did we ever figure out the core of the mystery? Did anybody ever crack the code? You think Beethoven or Brahms or Bach or
What mystery?
The mystery of how you, the code of the feeling, create feelings from musical patterns.
I did.
Well, some composers are good at it, I guess. The several affections of our spirit, by a sweet variety, have their own proper measures in their voice and singing. By some hidden correspondence wherewith. And this is like a philosophical inquiry. They are stirred up. Now writes St. Augustine. So even these religious dudes realize that it stirs up something. Who elsewhere goes on to interpret that correspondence in a way that was assiduously followed for centuries. In terms of what might be called a kind of Christian Pythagoreanism. The analogy was most immediately presents itself to a modern reader in connection with the whole theory of mode or pattern. Feeling elicited in the listeners is that of a communication system. Do you feel it's like a communication system?
Everything is in communication. You feel it or you don't feel it, you know it or you don't know it. There's a continuous communion between in the microscopic and the microscopic.
It's like information theory, huh?
Not necessarily information. You can call the whole thing information after you learn it, but it's not information. It's just beginning from sound.
It's not light. Exactly conscious.
It's a play of light and sound.
It's musical skills is almost intuitive. Communication system of any electrical line. In such a system, a message.
That's how intuition works.
A message or spoken statement is encoded in electrical impulses and transmitted along a channel to the receiver of the message, from whom it is decoded back into speech again. In the analogy with affective music, the feeling corresponds to the message and the music to the code. You think it's just code? Is it like writing computer code? In the mythology of the fabulous effects of music that descended from antiquity, the proper response to any sentient being to any particular musical mode was considered to be as automatic and predictable as the vocal response of a loudspeaker or mic headphone receiver to the electrical impulses fed into it. Do you think a person is just like a speaker, a receiver?
It's both a receiver and speaker and everything's both.
But headphones are receiver impulse to fed into, but with no empirically derived and substantiated set of hypotheses, those of physics, to account for the intervening process. Both classical and modern thinkers had to resort either to such metaphysical systems as could embrace the notion of modal correspondences, or to a final and underlying mystery. We may continue in the next session with the Greek modal system to crack this mystery. We're even going into the history of Byzantine music. We're going to stop here and with the Campion poem we started with. We were talking about moods and music. How do you create a mood? And how do you tune up your heart?
Let's say from the very beginning, just a mother sings to the baby. That creates a certain mood. Depending if she screams at the baby will start.
Well, we're talking about the code of musical notes, let's say.
Music also
the sequence, dear. If I play a set of notes on the piano, some sound happy and some sound sad, right?
The voice, the human voice, the singing, it's also sound.
We could just call it major and minor and things.
Also but